All right, everybody, Mike here with the Captain Phoenix channel with a special video today where we're going to, for the first and last time, do a review of a very recent Vaush video. Nobody seems to know how to pronounce his name. Doesn't matter. The point is, we're going to be doing a video on the king of bad faith, who's going to just bombard the caller with ad hoc arguments, because that's how his entire worldview is built, is entirely ad hoc and entirely within the framework of bad faith. And he's also pretty bad at statistics and doesn't understand that disparity isn't proof of discrimination. Discrimination can cause disparity, but it doesn't work the other way around. So that's weak form logic. You should be sticking to deductive reasoning, not inductive reasoning. But we'll get to that in a bit. So I'll have to admit that, yes, I have, in fact, watched a little bit of this video, the first minute or so, and the video is like 52 minutes long. And this is kind of going to be a test of my part of just how much of Vaush, whatever I can take. It won't be the whole video. I don't have time to do the whole video. I've got things I've got to do tonight, and I just plainly won't be able to take it. But this will be your introduction into a taste of, well, the worst the left has to offer. So without any further ado, let's dive right on in.
Yo.
What's up, man?
Not much. Just probably going to be talking to a few hundred people today. How about you?
I'm doing great, actually. I'm doing really, really good.
I see you're wearing a MAGA hat in your profile picture.
Which is so
I know
That's
this
a good
means
way to start off a
we'll have lots to
conversation,
talk
usually.
about. What's up? Are you participating in the traditional format of the call-in? Do you have a contention you would like to share with me? A disagreement?
Yeah. So, I was telling Hyena, or that's the username, anyways.
Mhm.
I apologize if that's not how you pronounce it, but
It's close enough.
anyways, yeah. So, so I was wanting to talk about your thoughts on systemic racism in America.
Yeah, sure.
His thoughts are that it exists no matter what, and I will bend my principles to make sure, and I will bend my statistics to make sure that the conclusion is proved regardless of the Do you see where I'm going with this? This won't take long.
So I know obviously we're going to disagree on this because I believe that systemic racism in America is non-existent because
yeah, we
of
might.
the fact. Yeah, so I believe it's non-existent mainly because the fact that it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And I do have history to back my point up if you would like me to go into that.
Sure. So let's get right into it. So why don't you make your argument, and then we'll get to it point by point.
Sure. So basically, my argument is that the system doesn't actually harm anybody of a specific race. Generally, it usually comes down to a culture and person by person basis. So why I say culture is mainly because it's descendant of what was formerly known as cracker culture, but.
So Vaush isn't going to let him explain what that means, but the idea is here that, and this is actually true, and Thomas Sowell goes into great detail on this matter in virtually every book he writes, that the urban culture that we think of it as today is actually descendant, like he said, in the most literal of senses, from the cultures of the Highlands of England and of Scotland and of Welsh descent. The white folk who came here hundreds and hundreds of years ago and who brought with them that culture, and which, because of the isolation, never really evolved. And then they passed that on, of course, to their slaves because they didn't allow their slaves to retain their former culture from Africa. And you'll notice this too during the Reconstruction era, you had Northern teachers coming to the South to teach students in the South. And that was because, of course, we here in the North absolutely demolished the South in the literal sense. We flattened, with Sherman's March being one example of that, flattened them. So they kind of didn't have the resources to do their own teaching. And the result that they found was, in the way that they described it, was that even the whites down South were described as just having a totally different culture from that of the North. And this is even true of the blacks in the North who went to visit the South during the Reconstruction era for exactly this purpose. What they found was that the whites in the South just had a very different worldview. There was communication was done in a more boisterous manner, as it has been described, and there was a much more of an emphasis on promoting the self, right? Like there was much more of a how dare you culture. There was much pride was their sin in the South, if you will. And this was in stark contrast to the North, who had preached humility both in practice and in concept. So even blacks in the North were noticing that whites in the South were experiencing this different culture. Now, there was a giant migration of blacks from the South in the 1930s, in huge part because of Jim Crow, but also because of catastrophic flooding that was happening down there and the devastation of the cotton industry. And that is when that culture got brought to places like Harlem and Chicago, and is what we describe today as, well, urban culture. And the truth is that, yes, it is 100% descendant of, as he describes it, cracker culture. We see this actually today in the hills of Virginia and in rural West Virginia, where those places were super, 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 super isolated. But if you compare those areas, which are almost entirely white, to similarly economically situated, very black areas, you'll find that the outcomes are very similar, and that there really isn't a disparity in treatment.
Is now modernly known as ghetto culture necessarily.
So, okay, so we can simplify this a little bit. So essentially your argument is black people get arrested more because they behave worse.
So we can reduce this argument to a reductionist level, but moving forward.
I would probably...
Yeah, okay, we don't need to. Okay, so let's get right into this. So, black people and white people both consume marijuana at roughly the same rate, but black people get arrested nearly 4 times as often for that.
It couldn't possibly be because there's certain differences in how they smoke their marijuana. It couldn't possibly be that. It couldn't possibly be because the overwhelming majority of cases in which there is even so much as an arrest for simple possession of marijuana, it's because there was something else going on. Right? It couldn't possibly be because violence erupted and also they found marijuana on somebody. Right? It couldn't possibly be because there was a disturbance call and they found marijuana on somebody, and whoever called the disturbance didn't want to press charges for whatever domestic dispute it might have been, if it's something along those lines. But the police have an outstanding warrant, so they bring him in, or maybe there isn't an outstanding warrant, so they bring somebody in because they have for simple possession, because that's really all they can get them on. And the same thing's true of Al Capone. Al Capone didn't go to jail, didn't go to prison because of RICO violations. They actually got him on tax evasion. So what Vaush doesn't realize is that if you have two identical parties and one makes a dumb effing decision, then obviously the person who makes a dumb effing decision is going to experience a different outcome. Not all human beings are identical. Vaush, hello.
So I don't know what restrictions you think police are subject to being held to, but if it is a distaste for the behavior of a community which leads to a 4 times disproportional arrest rate, I would say that's pretty evident of bias, especially since this bias seems to carry forward to black people regardless of their behavior in communities that are not as ghetto as, I guess, what you would associate with the typical black community.
Are those individuals, because we're going to treat them as individuals, because that's what you're supposed to do in a decent society, are those individuals exhibiting different behavior? Could it be that those individuals are exposed to a different culture? Like music is an element of culture that you don't need to be surrounded by in order to be exposed by it in the most literal of forms. For example, we have the internet. Do you know how much culture you absorb through the internet? Well, obviously you absorb elements of that culture, and if you start to act on those elements of culture that you're absorbing, say, from the internet, it doesn't matter where you live. You could live in absolute isolation in some homestead in Alaska and be completely by yourself. If you're going to be an ignorant drunk instead of an extremely productive person, you are going to starve on your homestead. End of story. And that outcome has nothing to do with race and everything to do with the individual's decision, a consideration Vaush is not going to make.
So I'm actually really glad you brought up that source because I love talking about this one. So basically, that experiment was actually asking people basically how often they use marijuana on a yearly basis. It didn't go down to monthly. It didn't go down to weekly. When you actually look at statistics that go down to a monthly basis of using marijuana and weekly basis of using marijuana, whites are actually using. I mean, whites are actually using it at a lower rate than blacks on a monthly and weekly basis.
On what level?
Oh, what do you mean, like on frequency of using it in that?
Yeah, like 1.2 times as much, 4 times as much. Like, what's the rate?
It's like, I think on the percentage rate, I think it was about nearly 20% more for monthly, and then the weekly was nearly 30% more than whites.
Okay, so that does not explain a 4 times difference.
But also,
It can. And it appears that Vaush doesn't quite understand how statistics works. So if you were to do the same study in, say, southern Texas, where you have almost entirely Hispanic population, let's say, right? And what you found was that in those cases, those Hispanics are coming directly across the border, let's say entirely for economic reasons, and just don't have the resources to bother with illicit substances, right? They're constantly working, let's say, because they're poor as hell, right? Okay, compare that to the whites in the area. Let's say the whites smoke marijuana on a weekly basis at a 30% higher rate. Okay, so then if the result in that situation is that the police arrest those white people at 4 times the rate of Hispanics, right? Let's say that that's the case. Then what we have here is a case where obviously it would explain basically the entirety of the disparity. What Vaush doesn't realize is that the relationship between an independent and dependent variable doesn't have to be 1. It can be 0.5. It can be 2. I mean, this is a rudimentary element of statistics that I think is just completely gone over Vaush's head.
but the 4 times difference also comes down to the fact that
yeah, it also comes down to the fact that, and we're going to get into what that fact is, but hello, are we subjecting this to a multivariate analysis? Or is Vaush trying to imply that the caller, who's obviously not suggesting that this is the case, is suggesting that the difference is made up entirely as a result of this flaw in the methodology? The point of bringing up the flaw in the methodology is that the results are useless when your methods are flawed, which means you can't draw any conclusions from it, which means that the reports that Vaush is citing are useless. He's already discredited the report, so on to the next proof of the claim. Right? The evidence provided is useless. So on to the next source of evidence. You don't have to suggest that the evidence is that because the methods were you don't have to suggest that there was an infinite number of flaws in the methods. If there is a critical flaw in the methods, then the methods discredit the results. End of story.
It's been proven off of surveys taken from marijuana users that white people usually are more prone to use marijuana with people that they are closer to and within
who aren't going to rat them out
instead of open areas, whereas black people are more prone to do it with people that they are non-associated with, would be more prone than a white person to do it with people that they're non-associated with and in public areas.
And in public areas, because if you smoke outside and a cop drives right by just driving along the road, he's going to see you smoking weed. Whereas if you're doing it in your home, you're not going to get arrested if a cop is just driving by your house. This is a case where the outcome you'd predict is not on a 1-to-1 correlation with the inputs. This is something where, like, if you smoke outside, you're like 50 times more likely to be arrested by a police officer than if you smoke inside. Hello.
Do you have any studies on that?
Yeah, let me pull up the statistic.
So you think that like black people just like are stupid and they just keep smoking in public areas?
No, I don't think that. I'm not considering this.
Trap question. He's already determined that this guy disagrees with him, so he's a racist, even though he's not making a race-based evaluation.
On like an unintelligent, that's just a dumb person. I'm just basing this on the fact that they're going to be. I think that off of this survey, it proves pretty much that they're more prone to, in these ghetto areas, do it in a more public area with people that just live in the neighborhood, but they don't necessarily know that person.
Wait. So what is that? Not knowing the person doesn't mean that person's a cop. I don't think undercover cops are typically dressing up like 16-year-old like.
I'm not saying it's an
Yeah, but your dumbass friend who flaps his yab, right? Like if I know anyone who's ever dealt with dealers knows how this works, right? You don't just introduce some random stranger to a dealer. You don't just give out your dealer's phone number to just randos, because the randos might slip up, right? But if I know a guy and I can trust him to not slip up, then I can trust him to not slip up. You don't have to have an undercover cop in this situation for you to get busted, right? Like who could just be dealing with somebody you shouldn't trust. Jesus Christ.
Undercover cop, though. I wasn't implying that. I'm just saying that if that person isn't necessarily trustworthy, then how are you going to trust them by doing a criminal activity with them?
Duh.
Do you think this might have something to do with the fact that stop and frisk rates are wildly disproportional based on race?
Pivot.
I don't think that it's race, though, because honest to goodness, like even stop and frisk, you look at stop and frisk, and people like to say, well, it's just because the cops patrol the black neighborhoods more often.
It's because they select black people because they're racist.
All cops are racist. All blacks are N-words. Do you see how when you put all race are derogatory thing? Do you see how that doesn't work? Do you see how improper that is, Vaush? Do you see how disingenuous this is to the argument? That you're presupposing a sin. In fact, it's not even a sin. It's an actual full-on evil of a huge birth of people with no exception, without exception. This is clearly a sign of somebody who's acting in bad faith, because nothing that this person says is going to convince them of this. Is going to convince them because of this presupposed condition, right? So obviously, if somebody is committing more crime, you're going to have more police officers in the area where all of that crime is happening, because that's what you're supposed to do. How the hell is one police officer supposed to patrol an area like Mogadishu, right? Like in Mogadishu, you would hope that the government in Somalia would have lots and lots and lots of police to make sure violence doesn't completely overtake the city, as it obviously already has. So in those circumstances, you would expect that there would be more incidences of stop and frisk simply because there are more police on the road to perform the stop and frisk. Duh. And if in that geography there happens to, by pure coincidence, be a demographic basis that isn't in line with the rest of the surrounding areas where the stop and frisk rates are lower, what do you think that's going to cause? It's going to cause an obvious difference in outcome that isn't based in race, right? This isn't because police officers are inherently and endemically racist. It's because there are more of them. I mean, basic statistics, dumbass.
The disproportionate selection of black people for stop and frisk laws in the states that employ them is massive.
Here we go. Disparity equals discrimination. The only way you can possibly have a disparity is because of discrimination, right? It couldn't possibly be that the reason NBA players are so much taller than the rest of the United States is because tall people make for good basketball players. It couldn't possibly be that. It couldn't possibly be, let's do one that's even more specific on race. Why is the NBA like 85% black? Is that because there's some nefarious actor who's selecting based on race? Or is it because basketball courts are really easy to establish in black communities, in urban communities, let's say, and that's where there's a disproportionate number of blacks, and it's much easier to reserve basketball court time than it is to reserve a giant grass field in Manhattan, say for something like soccer or football. Could it possibly be that there's an element of their culture that is prescribing the children who would want to play, who would have interest in this, towards that sport? Could it possibly be even that? And here we go. This could be an element of genetics in that. Black people tend to be taller than white people. And one of the best predictors of if you're ever going to join the NBA is how tall you are. I'm 5'6". It doesn't matter what my race is. I'm not playing in the NBA ever, no matter what. right? Muggsy Bogues is famous because he was the only one.
This is not a culture thing. This is regardless of neighborhood. Even with driving stops, which have nothing to do with culture, unless you think every black person drives around with like the low rider and the suspension that bounces while playing gangster rap or whatever. Like, I guess that would be like a black culture car.
Well, that's that's a very poor stereotype.
Well,
it's also very poor statistics because this is actually like a well-cited statistic. The driving while black claim is utter bullshit. It's utter bullshit. With the studies we actually have on that, the one study that has actually been done on all of this that's actually longitudinal in any way, that was done by the New Jersey Highway Department. You know what they found? You know what they found, Vaush? That when you speed, you get pulled over. And if there's a group of people that happen by pure circumstance to speed more often than another group of people, again, by pure circumstance, not by dint of skin color, but by pure circumstance, then you'd expect higher stopping rates. And what the New Jersey Highway Department actually found is that, whites were more likely to be pulled over because of speeding if you control for the variable of how likely whites and blacks were to speed, which means that they were actually under arresting and pulling over blacks at a lower rate based on how many of them were actually speeding than whites, because they found out that blacks sped way more often than whites. I mean, if young people speed way more often than old people, you would expect young people to get pulled over at way higher rates than old people. Notice how this doesn't have anything to do with race, and it's a fact that we all know is true and is obviously the case.
I've seen black people drive around. They look pretty much like white people driving around, but they still get stopped way more often.
It couldn't
for searches
possibly
and
because
for arrests.
It couldn't possibly because they're violating traffic laws more often. Couldn't possibly be the case. No, everyone violates the law at identical rates.
Regardless of disproportionate rates of traffic laws being violated, which don't really seem to have that much to do with race. Looks like pretty much.
Yeah, okay, fine. We're doing it. All right. Well, here we go. Here we go, folks. We're going to do it. New Jersey. How would we do this? Pullover rate. Rates by race. Study. Let's see how this goes. This is from the New York Times. Let's see. Cityjournal.org. Racial profiling myth debunked. Well, this is the actual study. Testing the racial. Here we go. Let's do this one. This is the actual study. Let's read the abstract. Prior studies have often measured racial profiling by comparing the racial and ethnic distributions from police stop rates to race and ethnicity data obtained from regional census counts. A more appropriate strategy for producing benchmark values, however, may be to determine the population of drivers or the population of traffic violators. So that means you don't divide by the number of people in New Jersey. You divide by the number of people who are committing actual crimes or who are violating the law. Duh. Because somebody who isn't even on the highway shouldn't be part of this equation. In taking this approach, the current study surveyed drivers at toll booths along the entire stretch of the New Jersey Turnpike to obtain self-reports of race and ethnicity, because how else do you do that? For drivers who refuse to provide self-reports, race and ethnicity were based on researchers' observations, bringing the total number of drivers in the study to 4,656. So we'd have to look at the methodology in that respect, but I would suggest that considering that only accounts for, what is that, 600, less than 620 out of 4,620, that's a pretty small percentage. And I would suggest that if we're doing a proper double-blind study, then we would account for nefarious actors. But we'd have to go into the methodology. But the point can be the same. I mean, it may or may not be a fatal flaw, but this is their conclusions so far, and this is the one study we have on this matter, and I'm sure the study that Vaush is referring to. Based on toll booth locations, racial and ethnic representatives were estimated for different sections of the turnpike. A turnpike speed survey was also conducted to determine the racial and ethnic characteristics of speeders on the turnpike. This was done by measuring speeds of a sample of vehicles on the turnpike while capturing high-resolution photographs of the drivers. Trained coders examined each photograph to determine the race or ethnicity of the driver. Vehicle speeds were used to determine whether the driver was a speeder or a non-speeder. So I'm not sure how in the world else you would do this, because if you actually use software that can determine your race, they have a really hard time doing that, because the visible light spectrum that allows us to see the pigmentation doesn't function in the ultraviolet or in the infrared, which is where those sensors tend to operate most accurately. So, you know, if you ever try to do like color editing on a camera for race, you'll find out that the metrics you want for the colorings are identical for like Wesley Snipes and for like Moby. Vehicle speeds were used to determine whether the driver was a speeder or non-speeder. Duh. Benchmark values from these two studies were then compared to police stops by state troopers who patrolled the turnpike. The results showed that the racial composition of speeders differed from non-speeding drivers and closely approximated the racial composition of police stops. The proportion of speeders identified as black reflected the proportion of black drivers stopped by police. 7 tables, 1 figure, 16 references, and appended supplementary data. And if you actually go into that data, which I've done before, and I don't know if we're going to have time to do in this video, if you actually go into that data, you'd find that, if anything, the disparity is the opposite of what Vaush is suggesting. But in any case, what this abstract is telling us is that this is the study to go by, right? Because it's the only one we really have. And the driving while black myth has been completely busted. Okay, so let's see if we can get through this. I doubt it, but let's see if we can get through this. Recommendations for traffic stop data, conclusions and recommendations, notes. We can go to page 55. I think this is the same study. Conclusions and recommendations. Yeah, whatever. This is going to be way too long. The abstract was good enough. Well done, Vaush. Well done, Vaush. Oh, and this is from the New York Times. So let's see. Oh, crap. I got to do the stupid. Here we go. Study suggests racial. Yes. Okay. So this is the original study that that had critical flaws in the fact that the denominator was the number of people in New Jersey, not the number of people being pulled over in traffic violations. You can see this is a much older article. Yeah. Okay. So we could do the Stanford Open. Let's see how this works. 2 million motorists every day, yet the most common police interaction at a traffic stop has not been tracked, at least not in any systemic way. The Stanford Open Police Project, a unique partnership starting in 2015, 200 million records of traffic stops. Data from 21 state patrol agencies, 21 comprising 100 banks, are sufficiently detailed to facilitate regular study. The result, the project has found significant racial disparities in policing. Based on these disparities can occur for many reasons, differences in driving behavior to name one. But in some cases, we find evidence that bias also plays a role. So then you'd have to actually name the case. On this site, you can explore results. You can find tutorials. We encourage you to dig into the data. Toward that end, we're releasing the records we've collected and our analysis code. We'll be regularly updating the repository and work. Okay. So yes, you can see by this chart that there's significantly higher stop rates. After the arrest, it's pretty identical. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading this wrong. So blue is black, green is Hispanic. And so Hispanic is actually lower than whites in terms of the number of stops. This is because have you ever driven with a Hispanic? They all drive slow as hell. Do you want to know why they drove slow as hell? Because a lot of Hispanics are illegal immigrants who don't want to get kicked out of the country. So, and who almost always, in the case of the illegal immigrant, have an illegally registered vehicle or no driver's license. Because get this, they're an illegal immigrant, and getting that documentation is near impossible. In many cases, at least. In California, it's probably a lot easier than it is in, say, Tennessee. Okay, so the arrest rates seem to be identical for blacks and Hispanics, and a little bit higher than whites based on the outcome. Now, of course, if the stop is, for example, are search more often than white drivers. So this is searches. But if minorities also happen to carry contraband at higher rates, these higher search rates may stem from appropriate police work. Hello. Disentangling discrimination from effective policing is challenging and requires more subtle statistical analysis, as we do below, and as Vaush refuses to acknowledge even should be done. So let's go back to King Bad Faith.
Pretty much nobody respects driving laws in this country. There's a higher average conviction rate for black people in the criminal justice system. Black people get higher sentences for the same amount of priors in the same crime committed.
No, not true. So if you're talking about so in that, and you know what could easily explain that? You know what one singular metric could easily explain that? What's the average income level of the average black and the average white person? If one is significantly lower than the other, and they are, who's being represented by a public defender? Who's being represented by a hotshot attorney? Right? And actually, if you review those studies, what they found is that the sentencing laws, when you do a multivariate analysis and control for all of these variables, that's not true at all.
The amount of data suggesting that the criminal justice system is discriminatory against black people, not people of blank culture, but black people, is overwhelming. To ignore the plurality of data on this subject is to engage in delusional thinking. And I don't know.
To ignore the control of variables is to not understand the scientific method. And that's what we're talking about here. And he's not going to cite his sources, so I don't need to cite mine then. But the truth of the matter is that in all of the cases that you're talking about, there's either a denominator issue or you're not controlling for enough variables. In many cases, no variables.
I don't know why a person would want to ignore all that data unless they had a motivated reason to not want to believe racism exists in this country.
Here we go. Here's the bad faith right there. Bam, folks. He is not willing to suggest this is where he's going to impugn everybody who disagrees with him with ill motive, right? There's a concept that I've gone over 100 times called Hanlon's razor. Do not attribute to malice what you can easily attribute to incompetence. People don't understand statistics. Statistics is a division of mathematics that is often very poorly misunderstood, very poorly understood. Case in point, Dr. Vaush here, who doesn't understand causal links between independent and dependent variables, and the fact that the causal link doesn't have to be exactly one for the variables to at least partly explain one from the other. So yeah, what he's basically done is put words into people's mouths. So if you disagree with me, you're a bad person. It couldn't possibly be that either Vaush is incorrect or there's some degree of incompetence. Bad faith. And here's why this is bad faith. Because you're not willing to engage that opposition in an honest manner. Because, again, you are going to discredit the reason for their conclusions, the reason that they have a stance, before you even allowed them to have the stance, right? This is going into a debate with no intent whatsoever to engage at all with the arguments of the debate. So there are arguments that can be presented in debate which are not arguments of the debate, but when you go into a debate, obviously you're going in assuming that the person you're debating is going to engage in the arguments of the debate, right? Should we invade mainland Japan, right? If you're a general in the War Council, right, and the President of the United States in 1945 says to you, listen, you guys in the War Council, what I need you to do is come up with a plan, the best plan to invade mainland Japan. Well, let's say there's an idiot in the group who comes up with some bad plan to invade mainland Japan. Well, there's three ways you can respond to this. One, that's a bad plan. Here's a better plan to invade mainland Japan. Two, we have nukes, so we shouldn't be bothering to invade mainland Japan. Three, the victory is not a virtuous goal, so we shouldn't aspire to victory in this respect, so we shouldn't invade mainland Japan. That wasn't what you were brought into the room for. No one in the room is in there to serve that end. No one. And everyone who went into that room, went into that debate with the understanding in good faith that you guys would engage in the arguments of the debate. Because maybe the president knows that we have the atomic bomb and he wants to do an evaluation of what the best strategy is for invading mainland Japan versus just using the atomic bomb. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. And we determined that invading mainland Japan, even in a best case scenario, would be a terrible mistake relative to just using the atomic bomb and getting the war over with, and would cost a hell of a lot more lives. And that's exactly what we determined. But the guy who's going to respond with either points 2 or 3, which have nothing to do with the debate at hand, is the guy engaging in bad faith. Because we all want to debate this thing, and you're coming into the debate room. We're assuming that you're coming in to debate the thing, and now you're not going to debate the thing. Crown awarded.
It's not. It's literally not ignoring the data. It's literally counteracting that data and exposing the flaws within that data. Just like the conviction rate one that you just brought up.
Oh yeah.
So the conviction rate one you brought up does not account for the weapon used in those crimes.
Yes, it does. So, same crimes with same priors.
Oh my God. Does not account for the weapon used in the crime. Yes, it does. Same crime, same priors. Murder one is murder one. If I beat you over the head with a baseball bat versus shooting you in the head with a gun, that's a different weapon, right? Right. It's the same thing with armed robbery. Armed robbery is very different if the arm you're using is a knife versus an illegally possessed M16, right? Obviously, if you plead down from the charges of the illegal possession so that you have exactly the same pled down crime, obviously the guy who's robbing the liquor store with a knife is going to get a lower sentence than the guy who has pled down to that lesser crime or has pled away the ancillary crimes. Yeah, obviously one is different from the other. So no, when you get charged for a crime, when you get convicted of a crime, you get convicted of the crime regardless of the weapon used. So no, it doesn't control. Jesus Christ.
Same crimes, yeah, okay. Same crimes doesn't mean that it's the same weapon.
Do you have any evidence? Right? Do you know what study you're referring to?
I can get second-degree murder as a black person would, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we both used a machete.
The weapon doesn't determine the amount of culpability necessary for committing the crime. If you commit a first,
which is what you should be telling the jury, not the people who are doing the studies on the outcomes of the jury.
Or second-degree murder with a tool or with a gun, it doesn't make a difference. It's the exact same crime.
It is the exact same crime. You're right. But whenever you're actually coming down to the weapon used, it's going to sway the actual jury to decide, oh, yeah, well, that's probably a more heinous crime.
Right.
More heinous crimes would probably be, it's going to still be second-degree murder if you chopped up someone's body or if you shot him with one bullet in the head.
Yeah, how is it more heinous to shoot a person in the head than it is?
He's not making that argument. He's saying that the jury is going to perceive it as more heinous, and in that case, recommend a much stronger sentence. Again, this isn't a flaw in his argument. This is a flaw in the juries themselves, which, by the way, has nothing to do with race and everything to do with the weapon.
Is to chop up a person's body.
I'm not saying. I mean the opposite way around. The chop up someone's body is going to be obviously more heinous, but just because it's the same crime doesn't mean that they're on the same level.
So you just gave a counterexample where a knife is more heinous than a gun. So how does the gun usage? Do you have any? Do you even know what study I'm referring to? Do you have any evidence that not only does the weapon used affect sentencing, but also that this study is failing to account for that?
So, okay, well, I'm not sure the exact source on that study, but I have read that study one time.
Vaush, do you have your study?
The conviction rate one. The conviction rate on African Americans.
But so do you have any counter evidence on it or?
Yes. So Vaush has posited a claim with no sources to cite, and then now is going to use the argument that because the other guy doesn't have sources to cite for his counter to Vaush's argument, the argument is void.
Or you're just saying they didn't account for this one thing that shouldn't actually factor into the sentencing length.
That's the thing though. I'm going to discredit that source because the fact that they didn't account for the weapon, which has everything to do with the case itself.
You need to prove that would be like saying you don't like the results of the study, so afterwards you're like, okay, well they didn't account for what hat the person wore to court. Do they have any data on the hat? The hat can make a difference for jury convictions.
Oh my God, that's obviously not what he's talking about. Because when if you could do that study, and perhaps the hat the person wears doesn't have a result. He's suggesting that the study has been done to prove his side of the claim, right? Like this is such an ad hoc load of crap.
You need to provide evidence that that was overlooked.
How legitimate
and B,
are source? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You have to provide evidence that A, they overlooked that fact, and B, that fact actually plays into the conviction rates. But
he did that. He said that they did, and then on both accounts. Now he has not provided a source. Also, you have not provided a source. So,
in the absence of that data, the evidence that black people are disproportionately convicted is pretty overwhelming, especially since a lot of those convictions are for nonviolent offenses, drug offenses. Or are you going to tell
drug offenses are almost always pled down from something else? Seriously? Like, do you know anything about courtroom procedure? Do you know anything about how drug convictions are actually manifest? Jesus, Vaush.
me like they smoked weed in a more heinous way than white people or something?
Oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. This is as much as I can take. Seriously, like, this is how the scientific method works, right? You have a hypothesis, right? I'm just gonna do the skeletal version of the scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis, right? You produce methods to test the hypothesis. Then you test the hypothesis. Then you have the results that are produced from the tests of the hypothesis. Then from the results, you're able to draw conclusions from the results that either prove or disprove, preferably disprove, the hypothesis, right? So, well, not preferably disprove. Excuse me. A good hypothesis needs to be disprovable. A hypothesis that isn't disprovable is a useless hypothesis. The problem is that if the methods are flawed, if there's a critical flaw in the methods, notice how I said if there's a critical flaw in the methods, the entire rest of the research is useless. You can't do anything with it. Right? The methods may be legitimate, but if the test itself is flawed, so if you have a tainted test, then the results are useless. This is how guys Ryan Braun got away with PED use because the test was flawed. There were flaws not in the methods, but in the actual practice of the test. So you couldn't do anything with the results. Now there may be flaws in the results themselves. Right, as in, if the collection of the results, if there's some sort of computation that needs to be accounted for. So let's say you have 80 million of something, and you need to divide that by 40 million of something. Right, if somebody accidentally gets 1 instead of 2, right, then that's a flaw in the results, which means the conclusions you draw from the results are useless because the results themselves are flawed. And then if the conclusions are flawed, you can't do anything with the conclusion, even if everything else before it was legitimate, right? Again, this is how the scientific method works. This is stuff that you're taught in like middle school, for crying out loud. And I'm not sure how Vaush doesn't quite understand this. He points out a flaw in the methods of the research and in the methods that were suggested by the study. It seems to me like a critical flaw when you don't account for such an obviously important variable. Right? Like, if there's a thing that is clearly going to influence the jury's outcomes, as has been proved by his claim at least, that the juries were influenced by that independent variable, then obviously it's a relevant independent variable. I mean, come the fuck on, man. I mean, Vaush, if you want to come and debate me on how these type of statistics work, glad to have you on the Mike Sinello show. But no, I don't have the research in front of me. If you want to debate the merits of his argument, then we would have to have the research in front of us. And if you're going to make a claim, then I'm going to counter the claim. And if your counterclaim to my counterclaim is that, well, you don't have a source, you haven't cited a source, so I don't have to listen to your arguments. Vaush, you haven't cited a source. You haven't cited a source, so this is a laughably disingenuous claim. This is clearly somebody who has conclusion drawn and is going to bend his principles to conform to the conclusion rather than to have the principle and to determine a conclusion based on those principles. Holy shit. Yeah. So this is the last. I made it 9 minutes and 21 seconds, folks. So for me, that's not a record, but this was an especially dumb video. Check out Vaush if you like. I'm not going to put his link in my channel description, because unlike Destiny's a good faith actor who has a different opinion than me on a lot of topics. This guy's a bad faith actor, and you should not be following him, except to understand how the other side functions. And I'm not sure how it is that they function, right? When you're this unprincipled, I have no idea how your principles don't backfire on yourself. Good luck, buddy.